Hello, and welcome to this information video about the BC Arts Council's Early Career Development Program. This video is intended for those who are applying on behalf of arts and culture organizations to any of the following components: internship, cohort, basic training internship, or basic training cohort. If you're an individual looking for information on applying to the residencies or mentorships components, please watch our other video, Early Career Development Application Information for Individuals. My name is Erin Macklem, and I'm joined by my colleague, Brianna Fabro, who co-facilitates this program with Michelle Benjamin. Before we dive into all things early career development, I want to let you know about our application assistance program. If you are deaf or have a disability and require assistance with things like registering in the online grant system, creating and submitting applications, providing project updates, or submitting final reports, the Application Assistance Program provides a contribution to help cover support costs. You can find a link to this program in the comments below. And now I'll pass the mic to Brianna.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, my name is Brianna Fabro. I'm one of the program advisors for the Early Career Development Program. If you're applying with a project based in performing arts, like music, theater, dance, circus arts, comedy, production, and/or technical, I'll be your contact for questions and support. My wonderful colleague, Michelle Benjamin, manages the studio arts applications in this program. She'll be your main contact if your project is rooted in visual arts, media arts, and literary arts, as well as museums and community arts councils. Today, I'm here to walk you through the program, address some of the most common questions we receive, and help guide you through the process. But before watching the rest of this video, we recommend that you have a look at the program guidelines. This document is found on the program webpage and will help you understand the intentions of the program, confirm if you are eligible to apply, and make sure your project activities align with what the grant supports.
If you still have questions after reading the guidelines, that's totally normal, and that's why we made this video. We hope that it will answer many of your remaining questions. So Brianna, can you give us a quick introduction to the Early Career Development Program and maybe describe its intentions?
Sure. Early career development supports learning activities for emerging and early career artists to develop their artistic practice, engage in knowledge transfer, skill sharing, and reciprocal learning in their area of practice, and expand their experience, networks, and exposure in the sector. We'll talk about this again later, but it's important for you to understand that this program does not support the creation or development of new work or new artistic projects. This is a learning-focused program and not a creation-based program. Individual early arts practitioners can apply for a learning-focused residency or a one-on-one mentorship. And as Erin mentioned, if you are applying as an individual, you can find out more information about these components in our other video. In this video, we're offering information geared towards organizations who are interested in applying to this program. There are 4 possible components: internship, cohort, basic training internship, and basic training cohort. For all of these components, the eligible arts organization submits the application, although the proposed intern or cohort, which we call the early arts practitioner, will also contribute to the application.
We're going to come back to what all these different components mean in a minute. But first, Brianna, can you explain how an organization can determine if it's eligible to apply to the Early Career Development Program?
Sure. There are a few different types of organizations that are eligible to apply. These include a registered nonprofit organization based in BC, which with a primary mandate and operations devoted to arts and culture, or a nonprofit Indigenous community organization that is primarily based in BC and is committed to offering regular arts and culture activities, or an Indigenous government in BC that offers regular arts and culture activities, or a book-based, BC-based book and periodical publishers, or an arts and culture organization operated by a local government in BC, but there are some pretty specific criteria related to this type of organization, so be sure to check out the guidelines for more information. And similarly, some arts and culture organizations operated by public post-secondary institutions in BC are eligible. So again, please check the guidelines for more details on that.
Thank you. Are there other eligibility considerations that organizations should be aware of before they apply?
Yeah, on page 5 of the guidelines for organizations, you'll find a list of things that apply to all organizations. So take time to read that carefully, and just below that is a list of ineligible organizations as well. And if you have any questions about eligibility, please get in touch with me or Michelle before you begin your application.
Great. I understand that there's an eligibility piece that is particular to the basic training, internships and cohorts components. Can you tell me more about that?
That's right. In order to be eligible to apply for the basic training components, the organization applying must be located in a regional location.
And what do you mean by regional location?
For our purposes at BC Arts Council, this means outside of the capital region and Greater Vancouver. There is a link in the basic training guidelines as well as the application form that goes into more detail about exactly what is meant by Greater Vancouver and the capital region. But if you're not sure, please call us before beginning your application to the basic training components.
So tell me more about these basic training components. These are relatively new additions to the early career development program, I think.
Yes, still quite new. We just piloted the basic training components last year. The intention with the basic training components is to support emerging artists in regional communities who may not have access to training opportunities such as post-secondary studies because of where they're located. We recognize that some arts organizations in regional communities have a hard time finding new workers because folks move away to get training or even to find entry-level work. So this program supports mentorship and on-the-job learning that will enable eligible emerging artists to stay and learn and work in their home community. This component is also intended to help arts organizations in regional areas support and develop a new and local generation of arts and culture workers while building capacity, sustainability, and addressing succession.
Okay, I see. So whereas with the regular internship and cohort components that are intended to help those who have already completed their basic training to transition and really launch into their professional practices.
That's right. That's the main difference there.
Great. Okay, so here's a question that relates to all of the components, whether they're basic training or not. What's the difference between a cohort and an intern?
Great question. An intern is one individual emerging artist that is hired at the organization to be engaged in projects while being directly and consistently mentored in areas that they have identified as their specific learning goals. A cohort is two or more emerging artists engaged in related learning activities at an organization as a group. So they are all learning together and have similar learning goals.
Okay, so can an organization just apply to hire an intern and then find someone later, or do they need to already know who that intern is or who those cohort members are?
Another great question, Erin. In the application, you must identify the intern or cohort members that you want to work with. They have to meet specific criteria, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They also have to provide information that will be part of your application. Part of the assessment criteria for this program looks at the match or alignment between the intern or cohort members and the organization. So it's important to have specific people in mind who have learning goals that are well suited to your organization.
Okay. Who can be hired as an intern?
We have pretty specific requirements for interns and cohort members. As we said earlier, it's important to check the guidelines for full details, but we're going to talk about the most important eligibility criteria for both interns and cohort members in both the basic training and regular components.
Great. Okay, let's start with the basic training components. What makes an early arts practitioner eligible to receive their basic training from an organization through this program?
For basic training eligibility, the early arts practitioner must live in the applicant organization's region and not have to relocate to participate. They must be at least 18 years of age as of December 31st, 2025. They must not have had any basic training in their practice, such as post-secondary arts training, or have not had more than 2 years experience working in the arts and culture sector. They have to demonstrate a commitment to the arts sector and their own arts practice. This might be through high school classes, community arts involvement, volunteer work, artistic achievements or awards, and they can't be enrolled in full-time studies when the activities are taking place.
Okay. And what are the eligibility requirements for early arts practitioners who have already completed their basic training?
Great, yes. So to be eligible to participate in the regular internship or cohort project with an organization, an early arts practitioner must be working or practicing in an area funded by the BC Arts Council. And you can see the full list in the guidelines. Also, not be enrolled in full-time studies when the project is taking place, and have completed basic training in their field of practice within 5 years of the application close date. If the early arts practitioner identifies with one of the BC Arts Council's designated priority groups, that window is extended to 10 years.
And what do you mean by designated priority groups?
The BC Arts Council's designated priority groups include applicants and arts and culture practitioners who are Indigenous, that would be First Nations, Métis, or Inuit peoples, deaf or experienced disability, Black or people of color, or located in areas outside Greater Vancouver or the Capital Region.
Okay. So because that's a little bit complicated, just to restate it, if an early arts practitioner identifies as Indigenous, deaf, or experiences disability, is Black or a person of color, or lives in a regional area, then they're eligible if they've completed their basic training within the last 10 years. And for those who don't identify as being part of one of those designated priority groups, they'd be eligible if they completed their basic training within the last 5 years.
That's correct.
Okay, great. So tell me, what do you mean by basic training in the sense of this thing that they've had to complete, this basic training?
Basic training means some kind of education that has prepared an early arts practitioner to work at a professional level in their field of practice and confirms their commitment to the practice. So some examples include traditional knowledge transfer from an elder or knowledge keeper, apprenticeship with a qualified artist, or a degree or diploma from an academic institution. Self-directed learning, such as watching online videos with minimal engagement or feedback, drop-in classes, or a series of workshops is not eligible. If you have questions about eligibility of an early arts practitioner you want to work with, give me or Michelle a call and we'll help confirm their eligibility. We may also ask you to submit supporting documentation.
Okay. Brianna, can you give us a quick popcorn style run through of some of the important things you should know about this program, like things that are relevant to both the basic training components and the regular internship and cohort components?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Your project must prioritize learning, knowledge transfer, and skill development for the early arts practitioner. We recognize that sometimes in some practices, the learning process involves creation, but remember that creation of new work cannot be the primary focus of an ECD project. This program is not intended to support a career pivot and is not meant to provide basic training for an early arts practitioner to transition to a new practice. The minimum length of an eligible project is 8 weeks to a maximum of 1 year or 52 weeks. It's essential that organizations designate a mentor to work with the intern or cohort. Multiple mentors are fine as long as you identify a main mentor in the organization. Part-time and full-time internships are both eligible.
What about remote opportunities, like working through distance with somebody? Is that eligible?
That is eligible too, but for the basic training, the intern or cohort members need to be located in your community.
So you'd have to have already completed your basic training if you wanted to do a remote opportunity with an organization, for example.
Yeah.
All right, read the guidelines for more information about that. Could an organization possibly hire an intern who's already working within their organization?
Yes, but with some qualification. If the intern or a cohort member is a recent or current employee, you have to indicate how the activities will satisfy their learning goals, and the work needs to be new or supplemental to the previous or current work. This grant cannot be used to support ongoing staff positions.
Okay, great. I'm going to switch gears. Let's talk about money. How much can organizations apply for and what can they spend it on?
Well, the main priority for this funding is paying the intern or cohort members. Fair and appropriate compensation is fundamental in all BC Arts Council programs. We provide some resources in the guidelines that will help you to determine a living wage in your location, as well as the standard compensation rates in the sector.
Brianna, I'm so sorry that you have a cough. Do you want me to
Thank you.
carry on?
Yes, please.
All right. Some other eligible expenses can include the salary or other compensation for the intern or cohort members, as well as any related costs like MERCs or mandatory employment related costs or benefits. Directly related travel and accommodation costs are eligible. Supplies and material costs directly related to the eligible activities. Any equipment directly related to the project up to $2,500. And compensation for a mentor, with the caveat that if the mentor is already working in your organization, compensation is only eligible if the hours are supplemental or are not part of their regular working hours. How are you doing?
Thanks for taking over there for a second.
I'm here for you.
Thank you. So to carry on, remember that funding in this program is not intended to subsidize an organization's existing operating or salary expenses, but rather to support additional costs associated with the internship or cohort. I'll also mention that if you're working with Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, collaborators, partners, or other types of contractors, there are recommendations for fees to help you determine reasonable rates of compensation. And we have really great resources and links in the guidelines, so check them out there. And in terms of maximum request amount, organizations can apply for a maximum of $30,000.
Okay. Let's say someone has a great idea for an opportunity at their organization for an early career development project. What are some things they should know or think about before they apply? Maybe tell me about the assessment criteria.
Yeah, so the assessment criteria are what assessors will use to score and rank your application. These criteria reflect the priorities here at the BC Arts Council, so understanding them will help you write a stronger proposal.
Great. What else?
You should have a look at the scoring guide. This document helps you to understand the significance of each element of the assessment criteria and is basically your window into the assessment process as it breaks down how assessors will evaluate your project. The scoring guide will help you to understand the priorities of the program and guide you through some of your application answers. In fact, here's a tip to support your application journey. Have a colleague read your draft application and they can use the scoring guide to give you feedback.
Great idea. There's two other documents that are important for folks to become familiar with. What are those?
First, the application preview is a screen-readable Microsoft Word document that includes all of the questions in the online application. You can use this document to work on your application offline, and then cut and paste your answers into the online application. The other document in the is the application checklist at the end of the guidelines. It's a really handy tool that will help you navigate through the application process and keep all of the pieces in your view.
I love a good checklist. Okay, what about work plans? How do you suggest applicants create a work plan?
Yeah, so in the application, there's a fillable work plan table that applicants will use to capture the timeline and all the activities and learning outcomes. So if your project spans many months, you may consider breaking the timeline into monthly sections, or if your project is a matter of weeks, break down the timeline in weekly sections. Assessors are really looking for realistic timelines and clarity around what will be learned through the activities taking place.
Let's talk a little bit about other support materials. Do the early arts practitioners need to provide a portfolio as part of the application?
No, they don't. Remember, assessors are assessing the impact and urgency of the learning opportunity. The focus is not on the quality of their work. However, if you're wondering, I lost my spot. However, if you're wondering what support materials you'll need for the application, let's talk about that. You must provide up to 2 signed letters from mentors confirming their participation in the project, 1 letter per mentor. The letter should describe the mentor's experience that confirms their suitability and capability to provide training and mentorship and knowledge transfer that responds directly to the early arts practitioners' learning goals. It should also address their commitment to providing a physical and culturally safe work environment, describing their practices and values that support this. And they should talk about any potential reciprocal impacts of the project on them and their community of practice.
That's right, because it can be a really great two-way learning opportunity. You can learn a lot from those interns and cohort members too.
Absolutely.
Okay, I promise not to change the script on the fly and make you lose your place again. Do you have any advice for organizations that are applying to this program that you haven't already mentioned?
That's a really great question. Assessors may not be familiar with your work, specific practices, communities, or cultures. So provide information that assessors will need to understand your project. Make sure to define technical terms and processes and avoid specialized or academic language or expressions that may be difficult to understand. If specialized terms must be included, provide a brief definition and description. If identity factors are important consideration or context for your early arts practitioner and for your organization, consider referencing them in the questions that that we ask about. Specifically, actually, for the early arts practitioner and the biographical statement that they'll be writing and uploading into the application. Use short, clear sentences or point form is encouraged as well, and you should provide answers fully responding to each question. Word counts indicate the maximum accepted words. You're not required to write to that limit.
Excellent. I know there's a question in the applications that we sometimes get asked about, so maybe you can speak to that. What about that question that's relating to working with communities?
Yeah, that question that states, if you're working with people or materials from underserved communities or communities outside your own, what steps will you take to collaborate respectfully and honor ownership and protocols? How will the project provide meaningful and reciprocal benefits to these communities?
That's the one.
It's a meaty one. Absolutely. Here are prompts to guide your response to that question. Thinking about who are the communities you engage with, what protocols must be followed to ensure respectful engagement, what are the expected benefits for each party, How will consent and ownership be handled? And how will you be responsible and respectful? Another challenging set of questions is around accessibility. Oh, I'm skipping parts. I'm going to backtrack here. Sticking to the community's question, if you're unsure if this question applies to you in your situation, it likely does. You don't live in a vacuum or work in a vacuum, and therefore take time to think about your intersections, your intended audiences and communities, the territories that you're living on, the histories of your practice, or you know the histories of your organization in context with the practice that you engage with and who you collaborate with.
That's right. Yeah. So applicants have the opportunity to identify their communities and thinking about communities in, you know, the micro kind of level, but also the macro, like community could be where you're located, the geography community or the geographic community. It could be your community of practice. It could be the community of the larger arts sector. It could be the community of the province and beyond. It could be your cultural community. So there's lots of different ways to think about community and the communities that you serve and engage with. And that's what that question is trying to dig into. Landing now on accessibility, that's another tough question in the application. Can you touch on that one?
Of course I can. And trying to make this video clear and concise, and I'm jumping around all over the place. So accessibility. There are possible approaches on how to address the questions in the application about safety and accessibility. So, you know, consider what your early arts practitioner will need to feel what they'll need to feel safe and supported during this opportunity. You know, perhaps you co-design agreements or create a safety plan between you and your early arts practitioner. You know, another idea would be to provide a timeline for reflection and review of your agreements and plans, and also to indicate how you'll measure and update these plans if circumstances shift or change. Often assessors would like to understand how you're addressing risk situations and care, not just that you have a policy in place. So just make sure that you try to explain the how.
Fantastic. Any last tips or advice that you can give to the applicants?
Of course I do. Creating a compelling and impactful project is not an easy task. A compelling project tells your story. Use plain language and avoid overly complex descriptions of your activities. Your work plan should be realistic and achievable within the timeline you've proposed. Clear, well-structured, and plain language applications really do make a difference. Your application will be assessed by a multidisciplinary panel. So if you're using discipline-specific language, explain terms that they may not be familiar with. Think about writing to a general audience. And remember, the assessment panel may not know who you or who you are, so clarity is key. On that note, we like to recommend that if you have someone who isn't familiar with your organization, read the application and ask them to describe the project back to you. That can be a really great tactic while writing your application. This can help you to understand what's already clear and what you might need to go back and clarify.
Great. Okay, so you've talked a bit about, I like your wording, what makes a compelling application. What else should organizations be thinking about in terms of making this a compelling internship or cohort experience? What should they be offering to these early arts practitioners?
I really love that question. Organizations are the support network and connector for early arts practitioners. They're really in a unique position to provide a super impactful transformational experience for someone just starting out in the sector. I recommend sitting down with the early arts practitioner that you've identified to dream up something exciting and inspiring together. this is supposed to be a way to launch early arts practitioners forward in their career. And you're giving them that lift up. So you want to make sure that your work plan together is realistic and achievable, but also exciting and rewarding for both your organization and the early arts practitioner. You also want to make sure you describe how your organization provides a safe and accessible environment for the early arts practitioner to grow. Often assessors would like to understand how you're assessing and supporting workplace safety, accessibility, and care. Um, so you don't just tell them that you have a policy in place, as I mentioned before. The how, you really have to explain the how.
Awesome. Thanks, Brianna. Yeah, I think we went over something and then went over it again, but that's a really important one.
It is.
What about the goals of the early arts practitioners? Tell me more about how they should speak to that.
Yeah, so make sure the early arts practitioners' goals and learning outcomes are well defined and show a meaningful impact on their artistic and or professional growth. So if you've included specific details in your written responses, make sure those are clearly reflected in your budget, support materials, and timeline or work plan. And finally, consider the long view of this opportunity. How will this opportunity contribute to development within your organization, in your community, and how might it benefit the broader arts sector?
Amazing. This is such a powerful program. And you've given us some great tips. We're just about to wrap things up, but can you remind us of some of the key dates to keep in mind?
Absolutely. This program has one intake per year. It typically opens mid-May and closes 6 weeks later near the end of June. This year, intake closes on June 25th. After the intake closes, it takes about 16 weeks for you to receive notification of results. So be sure to keep this in mind when planning your project timeline.
Amazing. Okay, in terms of next steps, once you're done watching this video, what can you do? Register in the online grants management system if you haven't already. Don't leave that until the last minute, because once you get registered, it can take up to 5 business days on our end to confirm that registration. So go ahead and do that now. Visit the program webpage, read those guidelines and the supporting documents, get familiar with those assessment criteria, and then mark your calendars. The applications close, that due date is June 25th at 11:59 p.m. That submit button is going to disappear, and so make sure you've hit submit before midnight comes. And remember, if you are deaf or a person with a disability, then application assistance might be able to support your grant writing. So just reach out to us for more information about that. Brianna, thanks so much for walking us through some of these common questions. I hope that folks find this video helpful.
I hope so too, and my pleasure. And also just to echo Erin, please reach out to us if you have any questions at all. Michelle and I are here for you. Wishing you good luck.
Thanks so much. Take care.